Alright, so I'm going to ask you a question. What do these things have in common? The Ulan Ude statue of Lenin's head, this synthwave mix, and the 2010 Glasgow Airport Rail Link DLC for Train Simulator. Now most of you won't have answered the question on account of the fact that I cannot hear you through the screen, and this video being pre-recorded cannot react. So what I'm going to do to address this is give some hypothetical answers. You can pretend you gave one of those if you didn't, and I'll even describe what each answer makes me think of the person who gave it, to help you choose. The first answer is the funny answer. They're all things that only weird nerds care about, or they're all in this video. I don't have much to say about these answers except that I'm amused, delighted, and where applicable, owned by them. Feel free to repeat any of yours in the comments. Those that answered with one of these are gorgeous and achingly cool, but have deep insecurities about their own intellect. I see a little of myself in these tragic clowns, and I greet them delightedly when they scamper toward me or caper around me. The second answer is a wrong but understandable and interesting one. In this answer, the common theme is nostalgia. This is understandable because it is arguably a property of the first two. The Lenin head is indubitably of the past, and the word nostalgia is literally in the title of the synthwave video. This answer is very close to the real one, and you will be kicking yourself when you hear it. Those that answered with this one are plain and distinctly average, but made compelling in their own way by a high degree of self-confidence. Normally I would find such confidence alienating, but there is a disarmingly humble charm that keeps me cordial, if not friendly, when we meet on the street. The final and correct answer is something called Hauntology because you put that in the title of the video. Answers along these lines would have been given by the very worst gremlins imaginable. Curs and blackguards all, but undeniably possessing keen minds and a certain animal cunning. I do not like any of you, but could come to respect you after a hard-fought knife fight. So as you may guess, again from the title, I'm going to talk in a lot more detail about Train Simulator's Glasgow Airport Rail Link DLC. Before that, however, I want to talk a bit more about the term Hauntology and explain it as best I can as a non-philosopher. While I do that, we'll be setting off, in virtuality, to the sun-kissed environs of Glasgow, where I'll drive a Class 380 very badly from the central station to the airport. The most succinct definition, the one I'm using for Hauntology, is nostalgia but for a lost future rather than a lost past. So in the cases of the examples at the beginning, we have the following lost futures: global communism, a future destroyed in 1922, 1953 or 1991, depending on who you ask, represented by Lenin's enormous bronze; the neon techno future promised in the 80s, represented by the simultaneously futuristic and dated synths that characterise synthwave; and finally a future of revitalised transport infrastructure, spending on the public good in general, cut short by the 2008 financial crisis and the subsequent austerity consensus which has dominated our political economy since. For a more thorough definition, we'll have to go back to the beginning and start where the term originated. In this case, a book called Spectres of Marx by the French critical theorist Jacques Derrida. It was published in 1993, not long after the collapse of the Soviet Union, a time when liberals were ecstatic and jubilant in their victory, while the socialist left was weakened and mourning. Francis Fukuyama had made his grand proclamation of the end of history just a year before, meaning the end of ideological struggle as the world settled into perpetual rule by liberal democracy. In a lot of ways, Derrida's book was a response to this. It's titled both a reference to the opening lines of the Communist Manifesto, A Spectre is Haunting Europe, The Spectre of Communism, and a more broad reference to the tendency of Marx's critique continuing to haunt the world even after apparent death. This tendency of things to exist and linger in the world even after their time has passed is described in terms of haunted ontology, or hauntology. This coining apparently works better in French because it sounds the same as ontology if you pronounce it in French. I'll leave that as an exercise for the viewer though, and spare you my crap French accent. Between this and the title of the book though, you should get the idea that the man liked playing with his words. The point, or more accurately a point, with hauntology was that history and the past, while they may die in the sense that their time passes, still inform a great deal of what is. That which is absent informs what is just as much as that which is present does, or indeed that which is past. This is particularly true in a present that does not and cannot generate a future. In the perpetual present of liberalism where tomorrow will just be today, but more. And so it is with the Lenin head from the start of the video. Not just a big and vaguely unsettling monument in the present, but also a reminder of the recent past and the futures it promised but failed to deliver. A fetter for the ghosts of Soviet communism. That's my attempt to get the core ideas across anyway. Old Jack was a pretty frustrating bloke, and that any given paragraph from his book would really require its own essay to explain. Thankfully the term hauntology has also been written about and refined by more accessible thinkers, particularly in film and music. In particular, I want to talk a bit about the use of the term by the British cultural theorist Mark Fisher, in his straightforwardly titled essay, What is Hauntology, from 2012. This is an essay that puts the term in the context of art and media. It's from this essay that I derived the simplified definition I gave at the top of the video, and most of my interpretation of spectres. It also contains the following passage, more or less at the beginning. What haunts the digital cul-de-sacs of the 21st century is not so much the past as all the lost futures that the 20th century taught us to anticipate. The digital cul-de-sacs he's talking about there are the genres of electronic music, genres that sounded innovative and futuristic in the late 20th century, but which had stagnated in a lot of ways as time went on, but also failed to give way to new genres as usual. Fisher goes on to explain, the futures that have been lost were more than a matter of musical style. More broadly, and more troublingly, the disappearance of the future meant a deterioration of a whole mode of social imagination, the capacity to conceive of a world radically different from the one in which we currently live. So, naturally, the synthwave mix. Neither the artist featured nor the curator, to the best of my knowledge, aimed to make something hauntological. In fact, explicitly the adverse. They aimed to make something nostalgic. In that attempt, though, they used the sound of the past's future. It betrays a desire for the old and familiar to be new, alien and exciting. The haunting here is not just from a future promised in the past, as with Lenin's head, but also from the cybernetic future the present was meant to deliver, but has consistently failed to. Which brings us, at long last, to Train Simulator, the game on the screen at the moment. A game by Dovetail Interactive, the most recent iteration of which was released September 2019. The gameplay you can see now is pretty straightforward. As the quicker amongst you have no doubt surmised from clues in the game's title and from the gameplay, the game aims to simulate the experience of driving a train. Nostalgia is the more usual mode of the game, naturally. Many of the popular trains have steam locomotives pulling them, and many of the maps, especially in the UK, are based on routes as they were in the mid-20th century. This is partly for gameplay reasons as well though. Modern trains, especially EMUs like the Class 380, more or less drive themselves, which limits the kinds of challenges you might face whilst playing in comparison to steam or even diesel trains. Even with that in mind though, the game is still almost entirely devoid of even tangentially hauntological content. Almost. See, there's a couple of DLCs for this game that introduce routes and vehicles that were planned but never realised. There's the Glasgow Airport rail link that we're on at the moment, of course, and also a recreation of British Rail's ill-failed attempt at developing a high-speed train in the creatively named Advanced Passenger Train. While we're here to have a little chat about the format, I thought it would be remiss not to mention the latter too. The APT was such a delightfully weird little goblin of a vehicle, and an interesting piece of Britain's past, very much worth its own in-depth discussion. The Engineering Disaster podcast, well there's your problem, is an episode which is just that, fortunately. I'll link it in the description. It's well worth a watch and even brings up Hauntology in reference to the project. Now though, it's time for the moment you've been waiting for, a mostly dry discussion of the DLC and its subject matter. This route I'm taking from Glasgow Airport is not one that exists, or has ever existed, outside of the game. That in itself is not completely unusual. The game does offer a number of fictional routes to drive along, even if it is mostly focused on extant and historical routes. What is unusual is that this is a route that could have existed. The reason that the DLC exists is that a version of it had been developed when it looked like the route would be realised. During its early development, DLC had been intended as a training program for professional drivers to familiarise themselves with the route. Once the route had been cancelled, the developers, a company now called Thomson Interactive, but at the time known as Totalised Media, already several hundred man-hours into the project, decided to adapt it for a general audience and released it as an expansion to Train Simulator. The route itself is to run from a reconstructed platform in Glasgow Central along existing routes to Paisley, Gilmore Street via Cardinal. From Paisley, between Gilmore Street and St James, it would have branched off onto roughly 2 kilometres of new track, headed directly to the airport over the M8. It was approved in 2006, but faced a number of hurdles during planning, including the fact that it could increase congestion on freight and passenger lines around Glasgow Central, and increased expense from changes to the planned route. After initial plans to cross the motorway using existing infrastructure proved impractical, none of these were truly insurmountable problems. Instead of fixing these issues, the government in early 2009 Scotland, under the SNP and led by legally not as expert Alex Salmond, simply scrapped the project. This was because the SNP were, like New Labour in the South, fully on board with austerity as the answer to the previous year's economic crash. The neoliberal consensus was clear. Countries could ill afford frivolities like public infrastructure work. It's this that makes the DLC hauntological, even without any intent on the part of the team working on it. It became a ghostly version of a thing that could have been but wasn't. It's an artifact out of time that serves as an admittedly rather small reminder of the world as it was and could be, where our political economy and justifying ideology not what they are. Not that the idea of mass transit links to Glasgow Airport were entirely abandoned, of course. Fittingly, the idea has been raised and put down repeatedly over the past decade, like a particularly stubborn apparition resisting constant exorcisms. From a practical standpoint, it will always be a good idea to set up a rail link. The airport to this day is only served by roads, with all the problems that entails for passengers and the environment. The two most practical and efficient ideas for resurrecting the project were a tram train line from Paisley and a light rail system, also from Paisley. Neither got particularly far, unsurprisingly, after the rightward lurch of the UK in the Thames. Naturally, because people are ridiculous, the least practical solution is the one that got the furthest. The proposed system would have relied on a personal rapid transit system. These are a type of low-capacity gadget barn, a term I first heard used by Justin Do Not Eat Rosniak in his excellent video on Musk's Loop, and more recently by Gareth Dennis in his video about maglevs. Links to both in the description. Essentially though, it is descriptive of any system that has a lot of characteristics in common with a railway but isn't one, and typically distinguishes itself from railways by being worse in some way. This video isn't about how much I hate PRTs though, just know that I do. The idea that might finally raise this rail link from its grave and maybe make the simulator DLC obsolete was a proposal approved in January this year of a new modern metro system for Glasgow that would start with a route between the airport and Paisley, sidestepping neatly the problem of congestion on existing track, barring further political obstacles, including the possibility of a shock therapy return to austerity after the coronavirus pandemic. Work could start before the end of the year. Probably best to keep the bubbly on ice until the track is laid though, if previous iterations are anything to go by. So now, finally, we come to our conclusion. There's not much left to say. The name of this video is to introduce the idea of hauntology a bit, although to really understand it I would recommend reading through the links in the description, or watching the video by Cuck Philosophy where he explains the idea in reference to the game Fallout 2, which will also be in the description. The actual aim, really, was to make the point that all genres of video games, not just those with traditional plots or characters, are worth applying this kind of analysis to. Even games that do not set out with the explicit goal of being art are shaped by their socio-political context, after all. Finally, I hope you understood that Glasgow Airport, and all airports as long as they must exist, need proper bloody mass transit connections, and for the foreseeable future that means trains. So all that is left now is the begging for engagement, and of course, the actual begging. Please like or dislike this video, leave comments about how great I am or yelling at me that I'm wrong. Subscribing would be good of you too. Make sure to select the bell thing if you want to know when my next video is up. You can support me by buying me a coffee using my Ko-fi link in the description. The Patreon link from my last video also works, but it's not really worth using until the release cycle of these is more frequent than annual. That's it. Finished.